Good morning. I think we're going to start today. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Oregon State Board of Agriculture meeting. Today is Thursday, February 23, 2023. This is Luisa Santa Maria, Chair of the Board. This meeting is now called to order. I would like to begin by asking the Department of Agriculture Board Coordinator Carla Balnes to review a few housekeeping items for the meeting.
Good morning, this is Carla. We'd like to ask for you to please mute your phones and computer audio during the call and during the meeting this morning to prevent any unnecessary background noise. And if you are joining the call by video, we request that only board members and presenters turn on their camera during the meeting. If you are joining the call by conference call only, pre-meeting materials are posted on the ODA website at oda.direct/board agriculture, or they will be posted after the meeting. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Carla. Carla, will you please call the roll for introductions? I will begin. Luisa Santa Maria, public member, Oregon State University Extension.
Chad Allen is excused absence today. Barbara Boyer is excused absent. Brian Harper.
Brian Harper, farmer, Junction City.
Shante Johnson.
Shante Johnson, mixed vegetable farmer, Corbett, Oregon.
Miguel Lopez.
Miguel Lopez, public member of Vineyard Farmer in the Willamette Valley.
Elin Miller.
Elin Miller, farmer, Umpqua, and I want to put a plug in. This is Give FFA Day, everybody. So it's FFA week. So I just wanted to mention that since this is all about agriculture.
Eric Oram.
Eric Oram, farmer, Heppner.
Randy Savati.
Randy Savati, farmer, Ontario.
Josh Zielinski.
Josh Zielinski, farmer, Salem, Oregon.
Dean Simonich is excused today, and Acting Director Lauren Henderson.
Good morning, Acting Director Lauren Henderson, Department of Agriculture.
We'd also like to remind people that to please sign up on the sign-in sheet on the table over here. And if you are joining the meeting online, to please use the chat box to add your name and organization so we have a record of who's joining us this morning. And we'll do introductions around the room. We'll start with Jonathan.
Jonathan Sando, Assistant Director, Department of Agriculture.
Isaac Stapleton, Program Director, Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture.
Wynn Matthews, CAFO and Fertilizer Programs Director with the Department of Agriculture.
Zach Loboy, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. I am the interim water quality manager for the program development.
Jess Paulson, Program Director, Market Access and Certification.
Do we have any folks online on a call-in number only that would like to unmute and introduce themselves?
All right. Thank you, Carla. Just some opening remarks. We will have a public comment at 9:45. I don't know if we have someone, but if you would like to sign up this morning to provide verbal comments in person, please sign up the sheet on the table prior to the comment period. If you are joining the meeting online, please make a request using the chat box, including your name and organization. Comment time will be limited to 3 minutes per person. So one more time, just a reminder that this meeting is recorded. Please remember to say your name for the record before you begin your comments. And yes, let's go ahead. And I would like to invite Y. Matthews. We're going to talk introduction to the CAFO permitting process. And Zach, I didn't know you were going to come together. Zach Lovely.
Perfect. Good morning, Chair Santa Maria and members of the committee. My name is Wim Matthews. I manage the confined animal feeding operation and the fertilizer programs here at ODA. And I'll have Zach introduce himself.
Thanks, Wim. Good morning, Chair Santa Maria and members of the board. I'm Zach Loboy with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. I am the interim water quality permit and program development manager.
So this morning we have a presentation on how the department operates the CAFO program, and you'll hear about how that goes in the partnerships that we have with both Department of Environmental Quality and EPA. So Carla, if you want to go ahead and can you start the slides for me? All right, so I wanted to start out with the definition of a confined animal feeding operation. Oregon's had a definition of confined animal feeding operation, that's the C in CAFO, from before EPA started the Clean Water Act. So this is pre-1972 legislation. And our definition says that if you have an animal, so one or more animal, and it defines as animals or poultry, and you confine them, it describes, the building pen or lot. So a pasture or range situation is not a confinement. A 10-acre field with 10,000 head of beef cows for about a week becomes a confinement because there's no vegetation anymore. And you'll see that at the end of each one of these items here, right, you've got the word or. So this is not, you don't need all of these things to become a CAFO that needs a permit. You just need one of them. So if you confine, you could need a permit with us. If you have wastewater treatment works, and they're defined in DEQ's rules, we adopt all of our rules to run this program from existing DEQ rules. Wastewater treatment works are anything that contains liquid waste like pipes, pumps, tanks, lagoons, that kind of infrastructure that would contain a liquid generated by a dairy operation or washing a confined animal feeding operation. And then any of these facilities that discharge waste into waters of the state, and we use the waters of the state definition, not the waters of the U.S., because the waters of the state of Oregon definition are much more broad than the waters of the U.S. definition. And then finally, any facility that's required under federal law, 40 CFR 122 is the federal concentrated animal feeding operation definition, right? So that's the federal US EPA Clean Water Act definition of a facility. So Oregon says any facility that Oregon state defines needs a permit, and any facility that EPA says needs a permit through our program. Next slide. There's been a lot of history on the program. Starting in the mid-'80s, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Environmental Quality started working on this issue. And we have been progressively together on this issue, since that time. In the early days, right, DEQ issued the permit if one was required. That then moved over to both agencies jointly issue the permits, which is the current status. Both agency directors signed the permits. And we have a memorandum of understanding to guide the operations of both the agencies. That memorandum gets updated about roughly once every 5 years, takes into account where the federal CAFO definition is, and things that are going on in our state that we want to make sure are in our program. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, right, also has oversight over the state's program. DEQ is the delegated authority to issue a national pollutant discharge elimination system permits, and they subdelegate that authority to ODA for CAFO permits through the memorandum. And then currently we have, and I'm sorry that number is incorrect, right, 504 permitted facilities. And I'll break down those facilities in some later slides here. All right, next slide.
Okay, I think I've got this one. So first, just let me say that our partnership with Oregon Department of Agriculture has been what we consider to be a huge success. We have had a really good partnership, and we work together on coming up with what our memorandum of understanding looks like. And that has been a very cooperative discussion over a number of years about any changes that need to be made and how we operate the program. So The slide has ODA on the left and DEQ on the right, but I'm going to start to the right. So DEQ, we assist in review of plans, provide the technical subject matter expertise, provide training and guidance as needed. Over the years, a lot of that training and guidance has been really a part of ODA's program. We don't have to do too much of that anymore. We do have dedicated general permit writers who work on renewing the permit along with ODA every 5 years. ODA is really working on implementing the program, right? So if we're providing that regulatory oversight and working on that permit collaboratively, ODA is really responsible for implementation of the program, and they've been doing a pretty successful job, at least in our eyes. So they approve permit coverage, review and approve the plans. They go out and do compliance inspections, work with facilities, and it's not just inspections to go out there and find violations. It's really about a lot of technical assistance, working with farmers and landowners to ensure operations are running smoothly. And again, kind of the last thing at the bottom there, and I just want to reiterate, so we work together on developing these permits and putting them together to make sure that they're workable and implementable.
All right, next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the permits because there are two different types of permits and then two flavors of each permit that the agencies would issue to a CAFO. The NPDES, that's the National Clean Water Act compliant permit. That complies with all the Federal Clean Water Act requirements that EPA requires. We issue those permits both in a general permit form that expires once every 5 years. And so that's one permit that has multiple facilities registered to it, right? They all have the same characteristics. They each have to have a nutrient management plan that describes the specific characteristic of that one farm as they register to that general permit, but the permit conditions are all the same for each facility. We also issue water pollution control facility permits. That's a state permit for land application of manure, litter, or processed wastewater. And those permits are effective for 10 years. The NPDES is a 5-year permit term. A facility that discharges into waters of the United States cannot be covered by a state permit, right? They've got to have the federal permit if they discharge into what's called waters of the United States, because that discharge is prohibited and they have to have a federal permit if they're going to, if they're close or may have that kind of activity. And I've got a slide here later that will show how the 504 facilities, how they divide up among these two permits. And then lastly, both of these permits, the agencies can issue what we call an individual permit for each of these two types. So an individual permit only covers one facility. The permit is tailored uniquely to that facility. So it may be a large facility located in a groundwater management area, right, that requires extra groundwater protection. We would do an individual permit. All the individual permits that we have 5 currently, require groundwater monitoring through monitoring wells. And so that's an additional level of monitoring for those facilities to make sure that when they're in a groundwater management area, right, they're not impacting that groundwater management area negatively. If they want to do experimental technology that we've never seen before, they want to try it as a waste treatment system, we would probably put them on an individual permit because we want to watch that work and probably put additional controls on it to see if it's going to be successful. And then the third reason we would use an individual permit is if facilities have compliance challenges, right? They've been out of compliance for a long time, or they're telling us they can't get back into compliance for a long period of time and they're going to impact the environment. We would probably take them off a general permit and require them to be on an individual permit. We actually have a facility in Tillamook right now that we are moving to an individual permit because of a compliance history issue. Next slide.
Okay, so we've been talking about CAFO permits, but now we're going to be talking a little bit about another particular permit that's required with new sites or sites that are growing. So one additional permit that DEQ requires is a 1200C construction stormwater permit. Construction stormwater permit is really for discharges of stormwater during construction activity. It doesn't it doesn't authorize discharge of any wastewaters from the site. So it's simply for construction of the facility. So most of the time when we're talking about construction of CAFOs, this permit, I think most people would say it's like a transitory permit, right? So people are going to get this permit, they're going to do construction. The
facilities comply with the permit. We don't have requirements in the permit that says everybody has to have the same system. We allow people to have systems that are, tailored to their facility, right, and are adequate so they can maintain compliance.
Thank you so much.
Okay, our presentation's back online.
All right, so now we'll go to the next slide from here. Thank you. So this is just a quick rundown, right, of federal requirements. And, based on the question we just talked about here, our programs exceed the federal requirements. And I'll show you what other states do in some slides coming up. But because we permit smaller facilities than US EPA requires based on our state law, we do exceed the Federal Clean Water Act. And a reminder that a federal CAFO is a concentrated facility and an Oregon facility is a confined. So the C stands for two different things as we go through. We require permits for all concentrated animal feeding operations and confined that have these characteristics. And our technical standards are the same for state facilities or federal that are listed in the Federal Clean Water Act rules. So, next slide. So I was going to talk a little bit about the application process, right? To get a permit, you have to apply to us. There are 4 different pieces of materials that we need to have a complete application. The first one's an application form. It's about 4 pages long. It's general information about who owns the land, right? If the operator is different than the landowner, those 2 entities, who they are, where the facility is, what the proposed operations are, size. I'm going to have a dairy. I'm going to milk 200 cows and have 200 head of young stock. You would describe that. And then you would, say, give us general information about location, where the fields are, the ownership, those things. The land use compatibility statement is a really important piece of the application because our agency, neither ODA nor DEQ, confer land use approval, right? But we need to make sure that land use is appropriate before we move forward on a permit. So land use compatibility statement is taken by the applicant to the local land use authority, the planning department, planning director, and they propose, hey, I want to build a dairy on this piece of property. And then that land use authority says, yes, that's an EFU zone property. Dairy is an outright allowed use. Yes, you can do that. If they wanted to build a dairy in a rural residential zone, I'm not going to say they couldn't do it, but there would likely have to be a change in land use, right? They'd have to get a conditional use permit, or there may need to be some other change in land use for that facility to actually exist there. And we can't move forward on a permit decision until the land use is set and solid. Irregardless of whether it's a poultry facility, dairy, beef feedlot, we permit wildlife safari down in Winston, Oregon. Those have locational specifics, right, that have to be approved. Each one of the applicants have to develop a nutrient management plan, and we have a list of minimum required elements in the permit. What that plan is, it is the operational activity that's specific only to that one facility. And I tell applicants, right, everybody has a plan, right? Your plan may not be written down anywhere, but if we ask you the questions about, well, how often do you milk your cows, and how, what do your cows weigh, and how many acres do you farm, and how do you spread manure, they would answer all those questions. The plan is them narrating to us how they operate, and then providing a set of data that shows we've got 72 acres of fields that we grow cool season grasses that we harvest in a grazing activity, right, in a mechanical harvest. And they would just list out all of those activities. The plans can range from 10 or 15 pages for small facility to 400 or 500 pages for a really large facility. But the important part, it's only for that one, it only fits that one place. We're a government entity. About 18% of this program is fee funded, so there's a fee. And then the structural design, if they want to build a lagoon or a manure tank or another piece of infrastructure, has to be stamped by an Oregon licensed engineer, and there are design standards that the applicant would have to follow. So, next slide. This is pretty busy. Apologize for that, but I wanted to walk you down through. Once we get a complete application, right, what do the agencies do? And there's lots of steps. So I want you to get that from this slide. We review the application, those pieces that we received from them. If it's complete, we start a 180-day clock, and we say, don't plan on constructing, right, give us 180 days to move through this. Because many of these things have to go to public notice, right? And there's a 35-day notice, there's a public hearing. The agencies get comments and have to respond to comments and then make decisions. ODA and DEQ work together to make sure that we're assigning the right permit for the proposal. There's a lot of feedback and coordination with the applicant and with a bunch of other agencies. You know, we're going to coordinate with a land use group to make sure that the land use is okay. We're going to coordinate with DEQ on, is a 1200 construction stormwater permit needed? If they're going to have a digester, do they need an air quality permit for the internal combustion engine that a digester may employ? What about their water quantity? So we talked to a water resources department, is do they have enough water rights to irrigate the 100 acres of irrigated cropland they said they had in their plan? Do they have enough water to water the livestock and industrial water to clean the milking system? And then the Oregon Health Authority, right? Some of these facilities are large enough that their water system requires a public water system development activity for the employees. And so what about drinking water wells? And how does OHA want us to protect drinking water wells if a facility comes under permit and is constructed? We release the application materials and they all go out to public comment. We have a hearing, we get comments, and as you might imagine, we get a lot of comments on a lot of these facilities and provide responses to them. Anytime we have a new application for a large facility or an existing facility that wants to become large, automatically triggers a public notice. The smaller facilities under the state permit don't go through public notice. Every permit, right, these are permit registrations, right? But every permit we talked about earlier, when the agencies issue the permit, those permits go through a public notice and participation activity. So there's a lot of opportunity, right, for the public to comment, and the agencies do get a lot of comment. The last piece is we come to a decision point, right? The agency can issue the permit or the registration to the permit as we noticed it without making any changes. We could require changes either to the nutrient management plan or to the application or to the permit, or we could deny that registration or permit issuance based on reasons that we either discovered during notice or decided as we looked at all those information. Next slide. I wanted to just to highlight through all of that last slide, I mean, all of that activity about public outreach, we have a lot of communication and outreach that the agency undertakes with partners and also with employees that we have. So we have a dedicated citizen liaison position in the department, and we work with her to make sure that all the tribes get outreach on any activity that we do around CAFO permitting or registration. We try to reach out to all the stakeholders that we're aware of, elected officials in the region where something may be going on, and then any local entities that we're aware of or that our citizen advocate can discover, so that we're trying to do a really broad outreach. We translate our materials into Spanish. We have had some of our public hearings where we've actually presented in English and Spanish. And so I just wanted to highlight those activities as we're trying to make sure that people are aware of what's being proposed, right, and have an opportunity to make comment to the agency. Next slide. So permit compliance pretty well rests on ODA shoulders for the most part. Again, if we have tough cases, we do partner with DEQ and EPA as necessary, and our State Department of Justice, right, both in the civil division, because our authorities are all civil, as well as criminal division, right? We have had CAFOs that we've taken to criminal enforcement. And some of the ways we ensure that permit requirements are being followed is we conduct routine inspections. We try to be at each facility about once every 10 months. There are 5 inspectors. I'm short one right now. We have 6 positions scattered around the state. And so we try to do one routine inspection every 10 months. That way we're not inspecting them the same month every year, right? You know, you expect them in June one year, right? Well, then it's in April the next year. It moves around the seasonal clock so we can see the operation in different operational times. Complaint inspections are our #1 activity. If we receive a complaint on a permit facility, that's priority 1 for us. Try to inspect that within 24 hours to find out. About 50% of those complaints are valid. And so we've received 257 complaints in the last 10 years, so around 25, 26 a year. And half of those are valid on permitted facilities, so it's an important activity for us. And then the permittees have monitoring and reporting requirements. They keep a pretty good list of data points on their activity. How much manure they spread, what day they spread it, what field it got spread on, how many pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus per acre did it provide, what was the weather conditions that day. So they have daily, weekly, monthly reporting activities. So they're continually feeding us information. Next slide, please. Other inspection activities, again, we are out there every 10 months. Larger or more complex facilities receive more frequent inspections. And then facilities that are having compliance challenges, right? If we are out and we write them up because of a compliance problem, that will likely generate a follow-up inspection that's going to happen before that 10-month period comes around again. We respond to complaints. Permittees request a technical and planning assistance from our staff, and we respond to those. And we do those follow-up inspections as needed to ensure compliance. One of the new things we've implemented in the last couple of years is what we call two-step construction completion inspections. And so if a facility says, hey, I want to build a new milking parlor, as an example, we would approve its construction once we receive the complete design package. And then during the construction phase, we would do inspections. And then at the end of construction, we would do a completion. We'd have their engineer provide us a completion report. And then we'd also send staff to look. And we'd ask them, turn on the water. We need to make sure the water runs, from this part of the system through the other part. So the things are there. It was constructed the way we approved it, and it's functional. And then we would allow it to operate. And then we do a compliance rate. Our key performance measure for the legislature is the compliance at their routine inspection. So their 10-month routine inspection, what was their compliance rate? And for 2022 is the last complete year of data. I have 97% of those routine inspections said the facilities were in compliance. Now that's not all the inspections we do, but that's that one routine every 10 months. So a pretty high compliance rate, I think probably in part to the fact that we're doing fairly routine inspections, and most of the facilities take the permit pretty seriously and pay close attention to it. So. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about kind of how permits divide up, right? We talked about the federal NPDES permit and the state WPCF. Of the 504, 362 facilities are on the federal permit. So the vast majority of our permits are the Federal Clean Water Act compliant one. 143 of those are on the state permit, and there are 5 individual permits, and 4 of the individuals happen to be NPDES. One is the WPCF. It was permitted in 1999. It's a facility that has never been constructed. They've maintained their permit since 1999 for a 12,000 head dairy. They have never built anything. And so we would likely, if they wanted to build today, we would probably move them to an NPDES permit. But for now, since they're not doing anything, they're there. Permit expiration dates. You'll notice that the NPDES is expired. We're in the process of renewing it. We've taken it to public hearing once. We are responding to comments and making some changes, and it will go out again to for another round of hearing. All right, next slide. So I wanted to talk about both dairy and poultry numbers, just so you can get an idea of how many facilities we permit in the state, and this will answer your question a little bit about size. So on the general permit, so the very first line are the general permit. How many general permitted NPDES general permit small facilities do we have? So it's less than 200 milking cows. We have 55 of those. So of the 504 total facilities, 193 are on an NPDES permit, 45 on a WPCF, 4 individuals in that one individual WPCF. And then you can see going across on, if you use the middle line, NPDES general permits, of the 193, 55 of those are small, less than 200 cows. 96 of those 193 have between 200 and 699 cows. 30 are tier 1 large. They have between 700 and 2,499 cows. And there are 12 tier 2 larges that have 10,000 cows or more. So you can see the breakdown based on size and permit type. I think Carla has this presentation in your package, so you can take a look at that in more detail, and feel free to ask bring questions on that too. Next slide. This talks about poultry, right? So poultry facilities and dairy, they're very different. The number of, so one animal is one animal, right? So one chicken is not equal to a cow in size and waste production, but for the permit, it's one. So the numbers here are going to be a lot larger. Same breakdown, the different types of facilities. I'll note there's no individual permits on poultry facilities, mainly because most of them don't land apply any chicken litter, right? They generate a lot of manure and chicken litter. They export the vast majority of it to fertilizer processing outfit and other farms. Looking at the NPDES general permit line for poultry right in the middle, there are 12 of them. And poultry is divided into two categories, right? Chickens that lay eggs and chickens that are for meat. These are the meat chickens only here. So broiler chickens, there are 12 NPDES permits, no smalls in that particular category. 3 mediums, so that's 37,500 chickens to 124,999 chickens. That's a medium facility. We have 3 of those. 8 tier 1 larges, so that's 125,000. Oh, looks like a couple zeros missing there. 125,000 to 349,999. And then 1 tier 2 large, more than 350,000 chickens, one-time capacity. So all these numbers are one-time capacity, right? What can all the barns on the facility, what can they hold if they're full one time? Broiler chickens, the turnover, you know, the grow out time is about 45 to 50 days. So they'll populate, grow, harvest those animals, and then clean the facility and put in another set of birds and grow another set. So these are one-time capacities. All right, next slide. Back on inspection, again, these are a couple other pieces about inspections I wanted to talk about. We require static groundwater monitoring wells on some facilities. You know, so a facility is going to locate where groundwater is close to the surface. We want to know how that groundwater moves up and down, right, and how close it gets to the facility where animals are and where manure is stored. The large facilities and any facility in groundwater management area has to do soil moisture monitoring. So that's real-time monitoring during the growing season in crop fields. And they have to calculate and then monitor the hydraulic loading. And how much irrigation water do they put on? How much processed water do they put on? What kind of precip happens? Everybody has to soil test regardless of size, regardless of where you operate. If you land apply, you have to take soil tests to figure out what the nutrient status of the soil is. And then in the fall, after the crop is grown, how much nutrients left behind, what residuals left behind that we need to manage. We inspect the production area, so that's where the livestock are, the milking parlor, the barns, the lagoons, the plumbing systems, making sure there's no discharge or leaks there. Our new permit is going to require surveillance sampling of all drinking water wells on the CAFOs for nitrate levels, right? So there's a 10 part per million maximum contaminant level for drinking water. Our new permit will require CAFO facilities to monitor any drinking water well they have, for those levels. They all have to keep records from a small amount of records to a large amount of records, depending on the size and complexity. And then they all have to do 24-hour reporting if they have a discharge, right, or permit non-compliance. So they have to call the agency and say, hey, something broke. Right, or my tank is full, I'm in Tillamook and my tank is full and they're forecasting rain for the next 5 days, what do I do? That's a requirement, and I would tell you that the incidence of self-reporting has increased every year that I've worked here. So permittees understand that the permit protects them as long as they self-report when there's an issue. Next slide. This is just a diagram that talks about that 2-step permitting construction activity I talked about. So they have a permit, they want to construct, we approve it. They have a water supply plan, which says they have legal water to do those activities. They build it, we inspect it, maybe once, maybe 5 times, depending on how big it is and how complex it is. We give them written approval to operate, and then they start the operation. And so we've added steps in here, right? Historically, we'd approved the construction, and then we may not show up until the facility had already been populated and was operating. Now we've got interim steps in between to look. So, next slide. These last couple of slides, I just wanted to talk about the characteristics and the difference and some compliance rate information, right? Contrasting like dairy operations with poultry. So these are dairy facilities now. So their facilities, typically the manure and mortality and compost storage area and feed storage area are usually affected by weather. So they have dairy cows in large uncovered lots. They have big open silage pads and silage bunker silos that are covered with plastic, right? But look at all the stormwater that comes onto those facilities. The lagoons are, for the most part, uncovered. There are a few now that have covers. There are a few tanks that have covers to shed rainwater, but in Tillamook, that's 5 feet of water a year of rainwater, right? That falls onto that facility that ends up in the storage. All dairies have liquid manure systems because they have milking apparatus that needs to be washed. And so that creates liquid processed wastewater, and they have to have some way to store it. A small percentage of dairy manure is handled in a purely solid form. The majority of it is handled in a liquid or slurry form. And so its runoff potential, right, is higher than a solid. And so it's just another challenge to manage. Large amounts of processed water are required to clean the milking system, to wash down the barns, to maintain their grade A license requirements and standards. And all dairies land apply. Every single one that we permitted have a land base attached to it, and they land apply processed wastewater and manure. 65% of the dairies in their plan have the ability to export some portion of their manure. So some separate solids from liquids and may sell the solids off to a vineyard, to an orchard, to other crop growers, or fertilizer manufacturing. Dairy drinking water, the animal drinking water consumption is higher per animal unit. So if you standardize animals to 1,000 pounds of animal, regardless of species, how much does 1,000 pounds of dairy cow drink versus 1,000 pounds of chicken? And a cow drinks more. A cow drinks 21.4 gallons per day per animal unit. And a broiler chicken drinks 1,000 pounds of broiler chicken consume 17.2 gallons of water. So dairies are a little more water intense on the drinking side. And then compliance rate, right? The dairies have the lowest compliance rate of any species and type of operation we permit because of a lot of those factors, right? I think a lot of their facilities affected by weather that they can't control. They have a big open expansive area that's just more difficult to manage. And they have liquid waste that if you get a hole in a pipe or something goes wrong, it doesn't just stay right there. It's going to run somewhere. 94.4% is what we would say is our overall dairy compliance rate versus that 97% on other ones. Next slide. And then poultry, the birds are all inside all the time. We don't have facilities that have grazing chickens, so the animals are all inside. The litter is all inside. The mortalities are all inside. The compost is all inside. There's no liquid manure systems, right? They do use some water to wash down and disinfect, but it's an extremely small amount, and it usually just evaporates through the system. If they have cooler water sludge that they collect out of these cooling cells, they usually incorporate it into their mortality compost. And we're talking about hundreds of gallons of water, not millions of gallons of water. Small amounts of processed water required, just they don't have a lot of liquid process that they need the water for. 87% of them export 100% of the litter and process or material litter that they get, mortality compost and litter, because they're not farming entities, right? They don't have land bases attached. They export it to other farmers, organic growers. All that material is organic. And then Stutzman, you may know the Stutzman facility up in Canby, right? That's they process a lot of chicken manure into fertilizer pellets. About 10,069 tons per year is exported to the fertilizer manufacturer, right? That's what's going to Stutzman on an annual basis, to give you an idea. Chickens drink less than cows, same numbers there. And poultry has the highest compliance rate, right, among our animal species at 97%. And beef is lower than poultry and dairy is lower than beef. So you'll see the hierarchy of compliance there. Next slide. There was a question about neighboring states, and so I looked at Washington, Idaho, and California. all of the 3 states have an NPDES general CAFO permit, and they're in various stages of renewal or activity. Remember that Oregon has 504 facilities registered, 360 some odd are on an NPDES permit, the rest of them on a state permit. Washington does have a NPDES general permit. They have 26 registrants currently. One of them is a poultry facility. They don't have a state permit. If you have an egg facility in Washington and you're doing egg wash activities, that liquid from the egg wash is covered under a different water quality permit. So in Oregon, we would add the egg wash into a CAFO permit on an egg facility. Washington separates it out differently. Idaho does have an NPDES CAFO general permit. Both Washington, Idaho, and California have more dairies than we do by far. Idaho does have a general permit. They have 0 registrants right now. They have nobody registered to their permit. And they do not have a state permit. California does have a general permit. They also have a state permit, and I just had difficulty getting the state permit numbers because there are 8 water boards that issue those permits, and I just couldn't find one collective area, right, where those numbers are. I'll see if I can come up with that. But on their federal NPDES permit, they have 141 registrants. So I guess just compare those numbers to Oregon's numbers. And California also may require an air quality permit on dairies and poultry, depending on where they're located within the state, right? If they're in an air shed that has other issues, non-compliance with national standards, they may need an air permit. And I think that's it. Is there one more, Carla? Nope. All right. Well, thanks for that, and take any questions you might have.
I had a question on the last slide. Idaho doesn't have anybody using a permit, so they just do it without any compliance at all, or is that what that means?
Yeah, that's essentially what that means. And it's interesting to us because up until about 1.5 years ago, EPA directly ran the program in Idaho, right? So they were responsible for issuing the permits, and they issued a permit. They've issued 2 permits over the years in Idaho. But, you know, the EPA current look at, do I need a permit or not, is they said, well, you don't need a permit unless you're actually discharging, right? We have to catch you discharging into the waters of the United States before we're going to require a permit. And based on their interpretation, they have not. The dairies have said, hey, look, we're not planning to discharge, right? And I think, you know, we've had comments. Most of our facilities, I'd say none of our facilities actually plan to have a discharge.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The permit is a protection so that they don't. It's the blueprint, right? So how do you do it without discharging? And then if you do have a weather-related discharge, right, the permit provides you protection so that you don't get dinged for that activity. But yeah, those states, you know, we believe have more facilities than we do and do not permit them at anywhere close to the rate that we permit.
Thanks.
Lauren Henderson, Acting Director. So, Carla, I don't know if we can get the presentation back up in case people want to reference the slides. But on that last point, could you, if Oregon did not have the state permit, which we were way ahead of everybody, still are, what do you think we would permit based on that comparison with the other states? Do you have an idea?
I would say, my guess is we would have about 100 facilities on permit.
So much less than the.
Right, it would be the larger ones only. Yeah.
Okay. And then a secondary thing, and this is really for the board. I know the answer to this, and I don't mean this to be a catch for either of you, but the board often hears the term factory farms. Where does that fit into your permitting process?
So we don't have any kind of term or definitional activity, right, on the ownership structure of a farm. You know, they have to tell us who the owner is. You know, there are many facilities that use an LLC, you know, a legal construct, right, for their land ownership entity, their operating entity. But we don't have a definitional issue to say this is a mega facility and this is not, or this is an industrial facility and this is a family facility. We don't have those distinctions.
So, Wim, to add to that, how does that relate to size then?
On size, again, we're kind of, I mean, we're a big diversity state as far as we'll permit anything that, you know, that comes along, from the dairy example, like from 3 cows to 38,000 cows. And so again, how they construct their business operating activity is not an issue for us. Not something that we'll make a comment on with the, you know, in the facility.
The reason why I bring that up is that that term gets used a lot, but it's frustrating, I think, for the public.
Yeah.
And frustrating maybe for those that are trying to understand the CAFO program, because every time we talk about it between DEQ and ODA, you will not find that term anywhere. Instead, you will find the differentiation between small, medium, large.
Tier 1, Tier 2.
Tier 1, Tier 2.
Correct.
That's how we determine where somebody falls in the permit process, not the term factory farm. That means different things to different people. But I thought that's worth noting. So when you hear that term, you have to turn that into how we permit CAFOs into those sizes based on what Wim and Zach talked about.
Miguel Lopez. So you had mentioned back on one of your slides, your communication and outreach, that some presentations are given in both English and Spanish. How come?
So one facility that was going to be located in Hermiston in Morrow County, we got a request from the Hispanic Advisory Council in the city of Hermiston to come make a presentation. And the request was just, could you come make a presentation, right, on this proposed facility? And I happened to ask in setting up the time, right, because of the title of the group, right, would it be helpful if we presented in Spanish? And she said, if you could do that, that'd be great. Well, I can't do that, but I have an employee who can. And so we felt that went really well. And I thought it was very interesting because I presented the material in English, and the questions came to me in English from members of their board, right? When my Hispanic employee presented in Spanish, the questions came from the audience in Spanish, and they were very different questions. And so we just felt that went really well, and kind of since that time have offered it if requested. We also, the agency employs a translation service, a real-time live translation service. So let's say somebody called and trying to think of a good country, that's France, so somebody wanted to speak to us in French. We can employ real-time translation, right, to make sure that we're understanding what the question is and then provide an adequate response. And if requested, right, we would translate materials into other languages. And I expect that, that may come. I mean, we have some Hmong folks that are looking at operating chicken CAFOs and other ethnic groups that want to operate certain facilities where English isn't their first language.
And that's where I was going with this was, do you see a growing population of minorities getting into this under their own structural abilities?
Absolutely.
Something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I don't work in dairy or beef or chickens, but this seems like a lot of work to be compliant and whatnot, but it's also really important. Are there any new technologies you mentioned, maybe both of you have seen, as far as water treatment goes, that make this? Are you seeing like science keeping up with these industries, or are they just kind of like, no, just, get more people that can fill out paperwork and do this for you? I mean, is there any affordable technologies that are coming out that make this something that small, medium people can do as well as big, or do you see it kind of, the technology is so expensive that only mega farm type people, the biggest people are going to be able to do it. Plus they have all the HR staff and the office staff that can, make sure they're keeping up with this compliance. I'm just curious what kind of technologies you're seeing out there.
Sure. Do you have anything you want to put on that?
Well, I guess I would say that, one of the things that is, I think, great about the way we've operated the CAFO program is really about the scalability. And so even though a lot of the techniques have been, kind of tried and true for a long time, and there's not a lot of as far as I know, brand new technology out there currently for wastewater treatment, at least at those scales. Because of that scalability, I think that it is available for smaller operators because they do have less requirements than the larger operators.
So I'd echo that scalability is a really important term for us. And so we look kind of first to kind of grower and farmer solutions, right? Because they're kind of the original innovators. So they're faced with a challenge, right? How are they going to meet that challenge? And they come up with some pretty amazing stuff. And a lot of the stuff actually, the invention starts on the farm, right? And then it becomes commercialized through the system. So we have people trying membrane filtration, right? Which is a pretty standard treatment in public treatment works, right? In sewage treatment plants. It's not been used a lot on farms, but it has promise. So I'm saying it's not a new technology, but I think the application could be new.
That's kind of what I was curious
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
Like sewage treatment versus
Yeah.
the same problem.
Yep. And then the other thing is, as people work on compliance, the record keeping activity, I think causes them to look at a metric about, well, what was my nitrogen use efficiency, right? I don't have enough nitrogen. And so if I'm losing nitrogen, I have to go to the marketplace and buy nitrogen, right? If I can increase my use efficiency, I can reduce my purchase to end cost. And that's a savings. And I think that just collecting that data and understanding the data helps them make those kinds of decisions and say, wow, I'd actually save more money here if I increase my end use efficiency by 2%, because it saved me $10 an acre, right, on purchase to end cost over here. So I think, like say, bring that data together and having them look at the data, again, which is not new and unique necessarily. It's, I think, the way they look at it and how they analyze it is that way. And then we're always looking to new technology. One of the things that would be neat is real-time nitrate flux and flow sensors in soil. Our groundwater management areas are because of nitrate, right? And it's a leaky system. Farming and nitrogen, some amount of it, right, is going to end up outside of the crop production system. And the best thing to do is minimize that leaching amount. If you had a meter in the soil at depth, like 4 feet under the soil below the root zone, that could tell you real time, graphing on your phone, hey, what's going on, right, with my nitrate? And then you make an irrigation and all of a sudden it goes like this. Or you make an application and 2 days later it goes like this. Or it goes like this, right? Wow, I'm starving the crop. That real-time data, I think, would be amazing because it would connect practices. You make an application on a vineyard, right? What happens the next week? What happens the next month from that application? Mm-hmm. And how efficient our plants and roots have taken that up.
It sounds to me like there's a great grant opportunity for somebody to come up with.
Yeah.
So they can have that, because that kind of potential metering systems do exist. They just need to be recalibrated and repurposed. But again, that's an added cost to our already strained farming companions within the dairy sector. I mean, my head was just reeling looking at all the permitting processes. I was like, how do you encourage that next generation to stick it out and come through and do it and make it easier for them? That's also a balancing act.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I mean, I appreciate the work DEQ and your department is doing. It's amazing. It's needed. At the same time, if I'm a next generation kid, first generation farmer who wants to get into it, I'm looking at this, it can be a little daunting.
Right. I do know that many operators have told us that as they've collected more data, right, and analyzed more data, that they found other ways to be profitable, to find other value in the permit rather than just the environmental protection, right, which doesn't pay anything. There's no return on investment for protecting. It's the right thing to do, but there's no cash flow from that thing. But implementing these other systems, there can be money, moved around through the operation by doing that. I think the other interesting thing is partnerships, and Miguel, you may be familiar with some of these. I know a lot of our grass seed growers are, with taking manure nutrients right off the farm and having other growers, pay for the haul and the nutrient value of this material so that we can reduce the nutrient load right on a facility that's had those nutrients land applied for 30 or 40 years in a row. And the P and K levels are pretty built up in those soils. Can we move those nutrients to the grass seed field down the road, to the vineyard, to the orchard? And so those connections, right, have some economic, benefit, I think, to the growers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yes, we do practice that to some extent in the valley.
Yeah.
but with, if, more so with the organic dairy farmer.
Right, right.
Miguel Lopez, so based on your compliance percentage, your visits every 10 months, have you guys maybe thought of extending those time periods?
You know, we have a CAFO advisory committee that meets 3 times a year. And so I posed that to them, and we've had pretty in-depth conversations about, you know, rewarding the good actors, right? So people that have, you know, you could eat off their floors. Their compliance is always 100% every time. And if something went wrong, they'd call you in 5 minutes. Could we extend the, you know, and we've proposed that, and we've kind of kicked that around. And what those people have told me really surprised me and said, you know what, me knowing that you're coming causes me to do a better job. So some of them say they want to maintain that schedule because it helps them on their compliance and activity. And so we've had those conversations. DEQ changed their rules a little bit on on-site septic systems several years ago, right? And we have another MOU with DEQ that septic systems are not allowed to be used anymore for non-human waste. And there used to be a lot of dog kennels that DEQ or the health department would approve a septic system for the dog waste from a kennel. And going forward, that's not going to be allowed. So we're picking up dog kennels now as CAFOs. Confined animals have a liquid waste system and used to land apply through a leach field. We won't allow a septic system. DEQ won't either. But, you know, those systems are kind of coming under our control now because of that, you know, because of that new rule and new activity.
I'd like to maybe just add one piece to what Wim was saying with compliance inspections, just because I'm familiar with the way that the ODA operates those inspections. And they also come with a really big piece of technical assistance. And so when you have somebody out there doing that compliance inspection, you're also able to give advice on how to operate and stay in compliance with the permit.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Brian Harper, I have one question, I guess, coming off of some of Miguel's comments, but also that last slide. How often do you see, and you might have mentioned this and I missed it, but how often do you see applications for a CAFO?
Oh, applications for CAFO. So they not every day, you know, so they do come in. I think we have 6 or 7 pending ones now. We're rolling out a program to have a conversation with raw milk dairies. And so the raw milk issue for us, you just kind of subtract the raw milk part, right? They're a dairy and they're purveying a product called raw milk, which we don't have a comment on one way or the other. But we believe those facilities need to have CAFO permits because of their operational characteristics. And so we are rolling that out. I think we're going to get some applications through that. We have applications sometimes that pen for a long period of time because they're not complete. I don't have data on how many we have. I mean, I can definitely come up with the numbers. I just can't think off the top of my head what. I'm going to say 20, 30, 40 a year is what we get. Probably 50% of them follow through and end up somewhere, and 50% fall by the wayside because of, I changed my mind, the landlord won't go for it, the Lux won't support it, those reasons. And then the other activity that we have a lot of are permit transfers. So both the state and the federal permit can be transferred. And so you can imagine many of these facilities are a landowner or investment entity owns the property, right? But there's an operator that's different. And the operator says, I'm retiring, and a new operator comes on, and we would transfer that. And it can transfer straight across as long as they're not making any changes and they agree to take on everything that's there.
Eric Orm. Can you explain the fee structure? Is it a one fee for an application, or is it a per head or AU fee, or how is that broken down?
Sure. So the fees are size dependent, not based on animal unit or head. They're just based on permit size. And so the annual fees, and I may make a little mistake because I don't have a slide on this, but we just increased our fees here a while ago. But a small general permit, right, either state or federal permit is $125 a year. That's our annual compliance fee. The application, I think, is $125, which is a one-time fee, right? Once you're on the permit, you don't pay that fee again. $250 for a medium facility, $400 annually for a large tier 1, $900 a year for a large tier 2.
Okay.
And so there is a graduated fee based on, those larger facilities are more complex and take us more time to evaluate, to inspect, to look at data from them. So that's the fee. And then the majority of the program is general fund funded. So the state and the citizens believe there's value in protecting water quality. So a high percentage of the program is general fund funded.
And if I could add to that, Lauren Henderson, Acting Director, the last time the fees were raised, there was a long discussion about what would the fee have to be to fully support the program.
Right.
It was in the lots of thousands of dollars, which was just not doable, frankly, for the amount of work that needs to go into it. So really what came out of that fee increase was the ability for the fees to basically pay for one staff person. So it's always going to need to be state supported in order to make the program work because of that regulatory scheme that you have. And all the work that really goes into the upfront, there's a lot of work between DEQ and ODA that goes in just to even consider a permit application, let alone actually having it in place. So.
Miguel Lopez, one more question to both of you. So water quality permit application process, slide number 9. It's 180 days. Have you guys needed longer than 180 days?
Yes. Yeah. So on facilities where we've gone to public notice, and we had a facility where we had 4,000 comments. Oh. And about 1,000 of them were pretty unique and lengthy. About 3,000 of them were form letters. But in responding to that comment, we just, we made the decision that we couldn't issue the permit the way it was proposed. And so we went back to the applicant saying, we're going to add these conditions. And the applicant balked at the conditions, right, and had to figure out, could they incorporate that, right, and come up with a new plan. And so it's like a chess game, right? You got a meter, whose ball's in whose court and whose clock is running. And then we'll let them take whatever time they need to come up with. At some point, we would cancel the application, right, if they're not going to respond. But getting an application, making sure it's complete, taking it to public notice, responding to comments, that could happen in 2 or 3 months' time. I mean, we've had them go that fast.
Thank you very much, Gwyn. And Zach, you brought a really interesting topic with so many questions. So I'm going to ask to the members of the board that are joining us remotely, they have questions. Can you see that, Carla? No? Elaine is not? All right. We don't have more questions. Oh, yes, she's there. I was missing.
No, I decided to stay more silent today, given the comments yesterday. So, no, great presentation. Thank you.
Right.
My history with EPA obviously was pretty connected with this program. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very nice.
You're very welcome. And say, if you think of questions later, feel free to reach out.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so since we have changed the schedule since the beginning, we had a schedule for at 9:45, so it will be 10 o'clock after about public comment. I don't know, we have public comment. Carla, do we have any public comments?
We had one person who signed up for public comment remote, Patrick Fay. We'd invite you to introduce yourself if you're online. And we don't have anybody signed up from in person.
So I think, I don't know, we need to take a break. And after that, is that okay with you? Okay. So let's take just try to be in the schedule here. We're going to take a break of 15 minutes, 10:15. We will come back and we will continue with our agenda. Thank you. Okay, we're going to continue. This is Luisa Santa Maria for the records. We had an agenda, the ODA Food Safety Animal Health Programs. I'm going to call Rusty Rock for the ODA Program Director for a presentation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair Santa Maria, Acting Director Henderson, members of the board. My name is Rusty Rock. I'm the Program Area Director for the Food Safety Animal Health and Lab Services Program of the ODA. Wanted to give you a quick overview. My slide is overly simple, just kind of a list, and most of the information that I'm going to cover is also covered in the document that was included with your board packet. I'm just going to kind of fill in some context. Starting with a little bit of background, I'll start with the Food Safety Program. The Food Safety Program has responsibilities related to essentially all food within the state of Oregon. We kind of start at the first point of harvest within the state. So raw agricultural commodities would fall under the produce safety side, and that is outside of the scope of the Food Safety Program. But then through the supply chain, any processing, distribution really falls within the scope of the Food Safety Program. And then the kind of the bracketed other end of the spectrum is foods that are for immediate consumption. So restaurants, bars, places where you're going to go and eat the food as the primary business, that would fall to county health programs. So we have a pretty wide swath of impact, and you can see from the list, encompassing the dairy, grocery, manufacturing, shellfish, seafood, and even the cannabis industry. So that kind of covers the scope and breadth of the Food Safety Program. And really what our primary goal is looking at public health. So we accomplish that through education. Education is our primary mission. Regulation is what we do, but we couch everything that we do from the standpoint of making sure that the folks that we visit have the knowledge and understanding of what the regulations are attempting to accomplish. Probably 50% of the work that we do is directly related to our routine inspection work. The other 50% is outreach and education, contacts, things like complaint investigations, so that those are really core to what our Food Safety Program does. Okay, where a lot of the sort, I mean, obviously we get our basis for conducting our inspections based in the Oregon Revised Statutes, but those statutes also direct us to the Code of Federal Regulations. We have a model food code. We have access to the pasteurized milk ordinance that guides us on how our dairy products are going to go into commerce. There's model shellfish regulations. We have, but the CFRs probably are the biggest source of information, and we, I think it was 2017, 2018, we adopted the new Food Safety Modernization Act within the Food Safety Program, commonly known as FSMA. So there are segments of that that are outside of the scope of the Food Safety Program, despite it being named the Food Safety Modernization Act. I think at the last board meeting, there was a lot of talk around the produce safety side of the FSMA regulations. And then there's some animal feed aspects of the Food Safety Modernization Act that haven't been adopted yet, but the core to the Food Safety Program is the new version of the good manufacturing practices that we adopted that includes some traceability aspects and the preventative controls aspect of the FSMA outreach program. So we spent over the last 5 years, we've trained up probably at least half of our inspectors have completed. We've got, I think right now, 32 inspectors, and half of them have completed the training and are fully capable of doing those preventative controls inspections. We've conducted 108 of those so far over the last 3 years. That work is conducted under a contract that we have with the FDA to do more than just the preventative controls work. That the preventative controls was added at the adoption of the new FSMA regulations. And we've done that work in conjunction with our routine work and also with our existing federal contract that was we do some of the inspectional work for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. Historically, we've done as many as 750 inspections for FDA. At this point in time, I think we're down looking at about 140 is our plan for this year, which is to me a more manageable number. And we really made a point of emphasis to decrease those numbers to try to balance out. There is a revenue stream there. We do contract with them. They pay us for the work that we do, but we have to balance that against the routine work that we do to support the entirety of the food industry within Oregon. So bringing it down to that number makes it more manageable. We are still coming out of kind of the pause that we had within COVID. At the conclusion of the COVID restrictions, we were looking at about 5,000 firms that were overdue for inspection. And from the way we've quantified what overdue means is it's an inspection that is more than 90 days overdue. And to put that in context, our inspectional frequency typically ranges between a year and 2.5 years. So we'll go to a firm once a year. Some of the higher risk firms that have complex operations, we might schedule as tightly as 6 months, but that's pretty uncommon. I think 1 year to 2 years is kind of the majority of, I think our average is about 14 months. So when a firm is 90 days overdue, we consider it to be, it falls in our aged category and becomes a point of emphasis for us. So at the conclusion of COVID, we had about 5,000 firms. Right now, we're looking at about 3,200 firms. So we've made pretty substantial progress in reducing those numbers. Part of the slowing of getting caught up on that had to do with, we also lost several staff members during COVID through attrition, not due to COVID specifically, but that they moved to different careers. And the training process that our food safety team goes through is pretty extensive. So we chose not to hire and fill those positions immediately because that would have required extensive close contact and was just a bad idea. So we are just now, we have our final position posted. It's in the Corvallis area. It's due to close and start the interview process next week, I think, or maybe this weekend. So we're very excited about that. And we're seeing kind of a commensurate catching up process where now that we're fully staffed, we're pretty excited about starting to take big chunks out of that aged process. On the other side of that, as Lauren, Acting Director Henderson had talked about yesterday, we are also experiencing some attrition in our management ranks. So the end of this month, we'll see a retirement of one of our long-term program managers. At the beginning of COVID, we'd also lost another program manager with a team of 3 program managers. Losing 2 has been pretty intensive. And then also myself, I'm 1 year into my role as the director of the program area. I was a program manager within that program, maybe not as long term, but I brought with me some industry context as well. So we are on that kind of curve of bringing new folks in and getting them trained up and trying to get as much overlapping as possible in that area. Exciting things that we've got going on in food safety. We have adopted some new regulations related to reusable containers, and that was something that we had been in contact with the industry about. It is a voluntary program that offers retail firms the ability to allow their customers through a practice that maintains public health and safety. They can bring in clean containers and refill those clean containers with bulk foods or with the proper policies and procedures in place. They could even have employees filling containers for them of foods that like a cottage cheese or a potato salad or something like that. So the overall goal was, and we were excited to be able to do this, to reduce the incidence of single-use plastics. Included in that was also produce. So you could bring in your own container to pick up produce at a retail grocery store or outlet of that sort. So that set of regulations went into place earlier this month. So we're still working to do outreach, but it's a pretty exciting thing, and it really puts Oregon on the forefront of the adoption of those regulations. The model food code that we use as kind of a guide on where we're at, that comes from a national committee called the Conference for Food Protection. They've been looking at improving the reusable container regulations for about 10 years, but being as it's 50 states, it moves rather slow. So it took us about probably 2 years since the initial request to where we finally figured out what pathway we were going to follow. We had been participating on a national committee that was giving advice to that Conference for Food Protection, but we decided we weren't going to wait. We just implemented ourselves. So I think we're pretty happy with the results, and we're hoping that they can take that model that we've generated and roll it out on a wider basis. But we also weren't going to wait for them. The other exciting thing that we have going on that I wanted to highlight related to our food safety program is we, in the governor's recommended budget, we're approved to move forward with our racial equity impact statement project. So REIS is what we call it. And the intent of that is that we recognize through some data analysis that we'd conducted 3 or 4 years ago that there were some historically marginalized and underserved communities that might not be getting the same level of attention and information that we intend to provide. And we saw that as a real opportunity. And with the governor's mandate, Governor Brown's mandate, and Director Taylor was very passionate about that, we were encouraged to start in the food safety program because food is really, let's face it, central to everybody's culture. Everybody likes to eat, and what we eat really kind of grounds us in what our background is. So to kind of create pathways for folks to bring their culturally unique food products to the public is really allows people to express themselves. And in some ways, the way the regulations were written, they're hard to understand, even for those of us that speak the same language that the regulations are written in. They're complex technical documents. So finding a better way to present those documents to the public is something we're very excited to be able to do. But it's also something that we're struggling to keep up with our current workload. So that's why as a project, our intention and we're very excited to hear that the governor's new budget had recommended that aspect go forward. We'll bring in a program analyst. They'll be their focus to be able to do that. So that's something hoping to get moving forward, creating a job description and bringing in a person to really kind of spearhead and lead that process and do outreach to communities that traditionally haven't been our central focus, and really figuring out how we can do that outreach and build those lines of communication. So something that is very near and dear to our hearts. Okay. I'll move kind of to our shellfish, and I'll lump in with our shellfish crab because they kind of are hand in hand. From a regulatory perspective, they're separate, but they lead into each other. This year's been a really contentious year. It's been difficult. There's been a lot of biotoxin issues in the waters off Oregon, specifically domoic acid. And domoic acid is a biotoxin that's created by algae. It's related to climate change or cyclical temperature shifts within the waters, marine waters. So the science, and they're still determining the science around that. Currently, the entire coastline is closed for razor clams. Razor clams, so there's high levels of domoic acid. So that's a recreational industry. We work with ODF&W to post signs and maintain those closures to protect public health. But razor clams are also an indicator species for other species that the crab feed on, because it's much easier to go catch a razor clam that's on the coast than to go out and try to do deep water harvesting of other shellfish or organisms that are feeding off that. But it kind of gives us an idea of what the domoic acid levels are like for crab. So when we have high levels of domoic acid in razor clams, then we will continue to test the crab to make sure that the viscera in the crab are not high in domoic acid. And the viscera in the crab is something that is typically consumed within specific, I don't want to say populations, but a lot of people like to eat it. Myself, I don't, but it's, we have to make sure that we're providing that food safety aspect universally. So that issue has been one that's been very emotionally charged. There's a lot of confusion around why we're doing our sampling and how often we're sampling. So we're doing a lot of outreach, trying to make sure that we're educating the public, the industry, and anybody who has any interest in crab or the economy of the Oregon coast. The Dungeness crab industry is a very vibrant and important part of the economy on the coast. So we're working to support that by making sure that the crab that is being sold is safe and also falls within the regulations that other countries that the crab are exported to use to validate the food safety aspect for their people as well. Let's see. I can talk a little bit. I mentioned cannabis. I would probably categorize that as a little bit of an extra food ingredient. It's not typical. It doesn't fall within the federal regulations. And that industry has grown and kind of stabilized out. You heard earlier related to hemp, how that it had kind of spiked up and now it's kind of stabilized out. I would say the same is true of the cannabis industry in general. I think last check we had about 400 firms that we had licensed that are related to cannabis, marijuana, or hemp products. Our total is about 11,000, so it's a pretty small percentage, but we use the same set of regulations for food safety. There's other aspects of regulations that are involved, but we don't get involved with those. We leave those to OLCC or Oregon Health Authority or for cannabis. But there's some other extra products that are coming online in the near future. There's psilocybin, which is the hallucinogenic portion of species of mushroom. I'm not super familiar with the technical terms other than psilocybin. So that is going to be delivered in a controlled environment that is going to be regulated by the Oregon Health Authority. But again, the food manufacturing aspect of that still falls within our sanitary regulations. So we're trying to stay in touch with that. And then another extra product would be the kratom products. So I'm sure you've all seen the signs on the side of the road. A lot of convenience stores say, get your kratom here. So we're the Department of Revenue has been tasked with regulating that product. And again, it's delivered as a food product. So we're trying to make sure that the regulations that are put in place are in line with our food safety regulations and offering to support them in making sure that public health is protected from that food safety aspect. So there's sanitary controls in place. And then the last thing related to food safety is kind of my transition into the animal health side, but it's our state meat inspection program. So that was authorized by the last legislative session, and we have had that in place and been doing a lot of training and outreach. We brought in an expert from the USDA and hired him to run our program. He has been immensely useful. At this time we have one firm, and it seems kind of silly to say that there's one firm, but we're actually really excited to have that one firm. But the needs and requirements to be equal to the USDA's regulations are pretty extensive. So we have at this point in time 10 firms that are looking to come online, and we're one of the first firm that is going to be a slaughter firm will be coming online. We're anticipating either the first or second week in March. So when that firm comes online, that's really going to put a little bit of a strain on us. So we've been doing training with our folks. The difference between the food safety program and the state meat inspection program is, like the USDA, anytime that they're processing, there has to be an individual there overseeing that processing or participating in that, the regulatory aspects of that processing. So whereas our food safety program has an average, visit frequency of once every 14 months, the state meat inspection program will have an average visit frequency of once a day. So that's a challenge for us to kind of work that middle ground, and staffing it is going to require us to adapt on the fly. So we've been looking at that, doing training and putting plans in place to be able to support that when it gets to full speed. Because it's important to us that we need to right size that. We can't hire people immediately and then have them sit and do nothing waiting for firms to come online when it takes them 3 to 9 months to come online. But we've had a lot of interest. We're excited to see that interest and really want to support that, because I think that's really going to be fundamental to the future of that program and to the future of the way that many in the state want to operate, to have that local source of food that is encompassing all aspects of the food chain. All right. So now I'm going to transition over to animal health. So our animal health program, we have in our animal health program of our state vet. There are 3 state veterinarians in the state of Oregon. Our state vet is specific to animal health. The other state vets are with ODF&W. They have a vet that is specific to wildlife health. And then the Oregon Health Authority has a state vet that is related to zoonotic diseases. So those are diseases that may affect humans. Actually, technically, there's a 4th state vet as well that has to do with the Racing Commission, but that one is very specific to racehorses. So our state vet really drives the program of tracking and monitoring animal disease within the state through a process of permitting and monitoring. And we've really been busy this year with the avian influenza. It's a highly pathogenic version of avian influenza. We've been fairly fortunate, and I like to joke that we've made it boring because we've got good response plans in place. It hasn't impacted our commercial industry, and we really credit the industry for their collaboration. We offered a lot of outreach. As soon as we knew that there was problems going on, they put biosecurity measures in place, and those have been very successful. And we're excited to continue that and continue to reinforce that with our partners in the industry. And then when we do see space where animals are reported to be impacted, then we have response plans in place and conduct our operations. And we've been very successful, and we haven't had any what we would call an echo events where you have a point source of sick birds and then it grows. We've seen point sources, we've resolved that point source and then encapsulated it. And we've had several point sources, but we haven't had one that grew and expanded. So that's to me a sign that we have good control measures in place. And then also within our animal health program, we have our livestock ID program, or a lot of folks will call it our brands program. And that program really is in place to prevent or deter the theft of livestock, specifically cattle. In this case, we also have some horse brand inspections, but that isn't as highly regulated. The cattle, we inspect about 1.1 million cattle per year with our 62 brand inspectors that we have scattered around the state. It's a very essential function that the state provides, and it's we're looking at how we can modernize some of the infrastructure associated with that, because to date it's very paper-based, and I think it's really important for us to transition into a more digital system so that we can maintain our costs. We've that industry, and I think one of our folks spoke yesterday from OCA. She mentioned that there may, or actually Todd Nash from the OCA had mentioned that he was anticipating a little bit of a downturn in that industry, and it's hard to maintain a level of customer service on a stable supply chain. Or you've got 1.1 million. It's been the same for 30 years, as far back as I've got data. And with costs are ever increasing, we have to figure out how can we be more efficient in our delivery of those services. So we're putting a lot of effort into how we can be more efficient in that area. Okay, and the last area I'm going to talk about, and by far not the least important, is our laboratory services. Right now, our regulatory lab is housed up in Portland. It's co-located with the Food Innovation Center in Portland, which is a facility that's owned by Oregon State University Extension. We moved there from, I'm not sure if it was in this room or one of the other rooms. In the 80s, there was a flood. This building was pretty much destroyed. A lot of our lab equipment was housed here. It was all relocated up to the FIC, and we've been there for 20 or so years. We've got, I think, 23 lab technician staff up there, and the building is feeling a little bit restrictive at this point, and I know OSU would like the space back. I don't know if it was ever intended to be a permanent solution. We've been in talks with DAS and with the governor's office about the potential relocation to a new facility in Wilsonville, the North Valley Complex. It's named the North Valley Complex because it's a big building facility, but it's a complex task or a complex topic as well. So we're still working through the logistics and finances on that side. But to us, from the lab perspective, it is absolutely essential because our lab is getting more and more demands asked of it. OLCC has asked us to see if we could potentially be a reference lab to help to stabilize out some of their lab services with private labs. We do work for a lot of different agencies as far as providing, and maybe not agencies, different programs within. So we do chemical testing for the pesticide program and for the fertilizer program. Do a lot of testing for our dairy program. So it has to be compliant with federal standards. It's ISO accredited, and there's millions of dollars of equipment that are in that facility that supports the entirety of the agency and overall make sure it builds confidence for our export markets as well. So it's a very essential function that the lab provides. So I think that covers everything. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you for that presentation, Rusty. Miguel Lopez. Under your food safety component, manufacturing, does alcohol producing facilities fall under this category?
Yes. So
and to what extent?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a range there. So the hard alcohol segment does fall within the scope of ODA, but it's really around the sanitary design and handling practices, labeling of the alcohols above a certain level, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, fall to OLCC and TTB. But as far as like beer and wine and cider, those all fall squarely within our regulatory scope. Actually, cider doesn't either. I think cider, the alcohol content, puts them over to TTB. But yeah. So, but we still, those areas all fall within our scope. And actually, wineries and breweries, I think that industry is pretty well stabilized. We see a lot of crossover there where they have some pretty complex operations. So we have to be kind of very deliberate in how we do our inspections there. Brewing beer, making wine, those are pretty inherently safe activities. If you mess up your sanitation in a winery or a brewery, you end up with wild fermentations, and there's decreases in quality that make it unpalatable. It's not necessarily a food issue, but there are a lot of potential issues related to that. But so we on the surface, we would typically look at those on a less frequent basis, but in a lot of those facilities, we're now seeing that they're doing complex food operations to support the agritourism, and that has driven us to really have to visit more often. So those have really been a point of excitement for us recently. But yes, they all fall within the scope of the food safety program.
Warren Henderson, Acting Director. Rusty, could you, for the board, just briefly describe how you and the Oregon Health Authority make decisions on what they do versus what we do, particularly the mixed use space like a deli and a store versus that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a very complex relationship that we have with them. On the surface, it's really simple. It's food for immediate consumption, but the kind of the examples I can use, I'm going to use breweries because McMinimums is my favorite example to use. We look at what is the predominant business. So if you go to McMinimums, they have a brewery on site, and then they also have a restaurant on site. But McMinimums, their beer is generally for immediate consumption. So they don't sell a lot of bottled beer. So those are inspected by the county health department, wherever it is that they're located. So that would be a brewery that has food service, but they're really more of a restaurant from the county perspective. The flip side of that would be Deschutes Brewery up in Bend. They're a large brewery. They distribute lots and lots of packaged beer, and they have a massive restaurant. So their predominant business is still packaged food. So that falls to ODA. So we inspect the restaurant as well. The mandate that we have that's really fundamental in our statutes is that in Oregon, you should only see one regulatory agency as far as the food safety inspections go. So it's either one or the other. And as businesses transition and change, we have conversations and we interact with the Oregon Health Authority, and they kind of they like to have us because we're more technically adept in a wide scale. So we have more brewery experience, so we'll support them if they have questions, but they still have to be the regulatory agency. Then the same thing would apply to like a Safeway store. So a Safeway has a deli, and a lot of that food is for immediate consumption. And in some cases, you'll see a Starbucks in that Safeway store. Those all fall within, because they're all owned by the Safeway store and have Safeway store employees. We regulate all aspects within that Safeway store. If in some cases you'll have a restaurant that's embedded within a store, if it's got separate ownership, then that would be licensed separately and it would stand on its own 2 feet as far as what their business practices are. So if you could have a facility that has 2 regulatory agencies, but it's because there's 2 businesses. So we license each business separately. Mm-hmm.
We heard about raw milk and like bring your own containers to stores. Obviously, there may be some food safety regulation or that's going to involve you at some point. How does your department weigh in on like these bills? Or do you weigh in, or do you just wait until they come and then figure out what you're going to do about it?
Yeah, no, we're pretty neutral in bills. So if the legislature decides that they would like to legalize raw milk, then we would, follow those regulations, and we would work on creating rules that, as we're guided within this.
Does anybody
bills.
Does anybody come and ask you, like, what do you think? How should I vote on this? Or, I mean, I'm just curious what the relationship is.
Yeah, no,
during, like the legislative process. I really never thought of it as involving you, other than when you asked for like a state meat inspection program, then obviously
and
you're asking them for something.
Right. And so we're a resource.
Do they ever come and ask you for anything?
So in the event that they ask us, we can provide them with technical data supporting, the hazards, the cost of doing some of the activities would be from the program standpoint. But we're happy to be a resource to answer any questions that are asked directly. But we're also very cognizant of the fact that, it's a bill that they're working on, and the decisions that they make are their decisions. So we're going to be supportive of whatever path they choose to follow. So we're not giving opinions or we're just going to provide scientific technical data and regulatory information related to how that might have impacts beyond, the state of Oregon even. Because I know one of the questions that comes to us from, related to the state meat program is, the first run at the state meat program was, well, we'll just do like we did with cannabis, and we'll say that this is outside of federal jurisdiction, so it just stays within Oregon, so we can do whatever we want. But it doesn't, there was other regulations in place. So we have to kind of lay out how the interplay of different regulations and different federal agencies have authorities and jurisdictions. So that plays into, even with the dairy, we have the pasteurized milk ordinance, which allows for interstate commerce of milk. And they look at how the state regulates milk. And obviously it can be done. Other states have done raw milk and still are allowed to conduct interstate commerce. But it's, one variable that fits into the scheme of, so, we're good. We're a resource. We're happy to answer questions, but we're also not going to, dig our heels and say no or yes. It's just, we're going to provide information.
Point out at times like that's going to cost a
Yeah.
lot, so, or whatever.
Yes.
Those might not be specific examples that would maybe not involve a lot of cost, but there probably are some bills that would that's a whole new layer of more inspectors, more whatever.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, but if I could, Lauren Henderson, Acting Director, you've asked a really good question. I think from my seat, I get asked a lot, well, Lauren, you need to go over and pound your fist on the table. I will just tell you that's not effective. And sitting in our seat, our job really is about identifying the risks, focus on what's the outcome. Because we try to support all of agriculture. Every activity has a risk. And so our staff, particularly in food safety, are really focused on if at the end of the activity it's food that is safe, what that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And if that has a cost, we're able to put in the fiscal cost to that. I think where we have challenges is when people, based on some activities, are exempting themselves in the statute from maybe other similar activities. And then we have to have a conversation about, did you just create what looks like an unequal playing field? This person across the street is held to this standard. The person that is across the street from that person is exempt because of size, activity, whatever it is. Those are hard conversations for us to have. But I can't tell you how many times in my career I've sat in hearings on very emotional hearings related to raw milk, all those kinds of things over and over again. And we just focus on what we do and let the decision makers make the right choice. When they have exempted activities, and there are a few in there, particularly around farmers markets and those kinds of things, we've made it very clear that's okay. Here's the standards and the rules, but don't expect us to go inspect them. Because I usually get asked, well, you are going to go check on those people. No, you exempted them. Yeah. There's no reason. So that's hard for people to understand. Well, you still have to check on them. No, they're exempt. And of course, if there was a problem or we noticed an issue, we would provide some technical expertise, and we do that all the time and have a very good working relationship with our farmers markets, and it's wonderful. But
Miguel Lopez, so that's a good point, because it also, for me, I was thinking about that in my head, and it relates to my question of, so you mentioned that OLCC needs or wants help with testing. Like, was this something that they brought up with you guys way at the beginning? Like, hey, we might tap you guys for some help. Can you give us some input, data sets that we would need for our proposal? Or was this kind of more like an afterthought? It's like, Rusty, you've got time on your hands.
No, and I can answer that question. Poor Rusty got dragged along with that conversation. It was something that the director of OLCC and I had several years ago. We recognized that when cannabis came into the marketplace in Oregon, that testing might be a needed issue, but they didn't have a lab. And so it was really about, well, we could build our own lab at OLCC, or we could use an existing state lab. And since ODA is kind of a third party to that and already does food testing and ingredient testing, or has the capabilities, would it make sense for us to use an existing laboratory to do that? Well, fast forward today, there have been issues and people have wondered, is I as a consumer really getting that product on the shelf in cannabis? Is what they say it's in it really in it? FDA does market assurance testing or market basket testing, I'm sorry, all the time. You just don't hear about it very much where they'll go out and look for things. That was the concept. So,
Do the same.
yeah, so OLCC and I, we worked on that number in that governor's budget for what we thought the infrastructure would cost. And then the sampling costs would have to come later. And I'll just add to that, this program particularly is really dependent on state support. You cannot run infrastructure programs on fees. They go up and down and sometimes they're not stable. The lab services program particularly, just to call yourself a lab, and this is an exaggeration, but it's millions of dollars just to have the technical training and the competence of the staff. And then you add 400,000 or 500,000 pieces of equipment and there's multiples of them. That is really difficult to charge fees for, to figure out what that is, because if fees go down and business is hard for people, then all of a sudden you're left with an infrastructure and no way to pay for it. So the state support is so critical to just saying I have the technical competence to be able to manage not only the day-to-day work, but the emerging issues. That lab was a big part of the cyanotoxin water issue in Salem that we had several years ago. And we were asked to help identify a test and a method that didn't exist in food. They could test it in water, but they didn't know what happened. Breweries in town were going, what do I do? Is my beer got this toxin in it or not? And we were able to manage through that. But right.
The members online remotely joining us, do you have questions?
Yeah, Elin Miller here. And just acting director, does the presumptive testing go into it, part of that number? I think it was 1.2 million. I can't remember how much the OLCC payment would be to cover the cost for cannabis. Is that presumptive testing too, or is that more product quality? I wasn't quite getting that.
Thank you, Elin, for the question. We hadn't quite got down to the nitty gritty of exactly what day-to-day testing might look like. I'm going to guess the shorter answer is, yeah, that would be included if the situation necessitated that. The other part of that is having the ODA lab be a quality assurance lab for the private labs, which doesn't exist today. So our lab is accredited. We have to do blind testing. So they'll send us something. They know the answer to it, and it's kind of a test. And our lab does the processes, and they double check our work. That was a part of this too, just to make sure that the whole system was doing what it needed to do. So if that gets funded, it's dependent on the North Valley complex. We had to build in a lot of security. You can't just have cannabis laying around, as you can imagine. And so the building was built for that. But then more to come on that would be the day-to-day sampling needs. And I'm going to guess it will have some mix of crisis. You know, something happened, somebody made a complaint, somebody got sick, what's going on, versus day-to-day, which is the QA parts of the lab. And then the market basket testing, where we have staff, not our staff, but OLCC staff actually pulling products off the shelf. I believe personally, this is Lauren speaking, that market basket testing is a bigger deterrent than maybe some of the other stuff we do. If you know your product might get pulled and there might be a problem, and we don't, I'm not saying that there's this huge, massive problem out there. It just was identified as a gap by a couple of committees that would really round out the program into a really good program for the whole state.
Thank you, and appreciate ODA's leadership with OLCC on this issue and others. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. All right, thank you very much to be here. Give us your report, Rusty. I think we're going to continue with our board business now. Since we don't have any public comment, right? No. Okay. So, yeah, the next item in our agenda is the board business. So we're going to start with the ODA program area reports. Any questions for the ODA staff that is here? Did you check the reports? I think I reviewed the reports. They look very good. I don't have any specific question. I don't know. No?
Wait.
And do you have, Ellie?
Yeah,
No,
maybe
fine.
I'm mirroring Barbara Boyer. So I did have a question, and it is related to the lab. And there was a discussion of some attrition of employees because of potentially having to move into a different location. And is there it's funding related, certainly, but what's the timing again? I mean, we were so impressed when we had a chance to visit what was going on there, but what is the current timing of what we think, assuming the funding comes forward?
Lauren Henderson, Acting Director. Thank you for the question, Elin. The timing right now, assuming that it gets funded and all of that is worked out, is probably September of October. It's coming. The building is 85, 90% done. It's been on schedule. They said it was going to be September, and I thought, oh, it'd probably be January, but no, you all saw it. It's getting completed, and so I think we'll be, assuming it gets funded, there would be plans to move sometime in the fall. That being said, we have to do this. It's not like moving into your house. The moving of that scientific equipment, they won't let me throw it in the back of my Suburban. I offered. They said, no, that wouldn't be a good idea. So there's going to be a transitional move where it could take us weeks. We still have to operate as a lab because Rusty needs the food safety testing. And so we may have to rely on some help from some other labs to get there. So even though I say September, we probably won't be fully operational in that lab till maybe December, January, because once we get the equipment moved, it has to be then calibrated and tested. And we're building all that into the big move, which is why nobody ever wants to move in lab space, because it's not an easy thing to do. But we've got contingency plans to make sure we don't go completely dark for a very long time. But I can't anticipate our labs being closed maybe a week or so while they move. But we'll plan on that for our sample loads and make sure we do that right.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Luisa Santamaria for the record. We don't have questions about the reports. We're going to, with the OWEB report, Board Member Barbara Boyer is not in attendance, and she will provide updates at the next meeting. So then our next step will be resolution work groups. So I'm going to ask the groups A and B if you can provide the reports for the resolutions. Let's start with Eric, Group A.
Eric Orm for the record. So I'll be speaking on behalf of Work Group A. We went over a number of resolutions, first being resolution number 000, Board of Agriculture Policy and Procedures for resolutions. We proposed edits, our staff proposed edits to clarify purpose of guidelines. Edits will be posted for public comment. Resolution 029 is reservation of Columbia River water for irrigation purposes. We chose to keep active with no proposed edits. Resolution 124, which is trade policy that promotes free and reciprocal access. We chose to keep active with no proposed edits. Resolution number 269, Board of Agriculture supports development of biofuels in Oregon. We chose to hold for further review. Resolution 275, the Cougar Management Plan. We chose to keep active with no proposed edits. And Resolution 305, the Native Plant Conservation Program. There were proposed edits from staff to the background statement and updates to the resolution statement. Edits will be posted for public comment. And that's all I have. Chair Santamaria.
Thank you very much. Let's go with the Group B.
Randy Savati. We did a brief overview of all of the resolutions that we have on our plate for this year. went through, did some red lines on all of them, ultimately left them open for public comment. We will be getting, and then especially 310, citing for agritourism, entertainment activities, and associated activities on agricultural lands. That one will be getting a presentation to get some more information on that we presented to the board as well. So no major edits, an overview, and we will have some proposed edits for public comment next time.
Is that the end of your report?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that is what we have in our agenda now. Maybe, I don't know, Carla, do we have something else to add here?
The last thing is our newsletter topics, and
That's right.
I need to apologize that I am behind on that, getting that task taken care of, and I'm also working on updating our annual report. So those are a priority for me in the next month or so. So if you have any topics from this meeting today for a newsletter, I'm happy to put that together and get that a priority and get that information out.
Okay, thank you, Carla. So the members can have some ideas. What would you like to see in a newsletter? Well, I guess we can mention about our visit yesterday to the, definitely that would be, I don't know, we have pictures.
I think
Taylor may have taken some pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be worth it. I should have one in my head. Miguel Lopez, Rusty had mentioned it. We have our first meat inspection component opening up here in March, correct, Rusty?
Yes.
Maybe worth mentioning that we've got one opening.
Oh, that's right.
And I typically add a little bit about all of the, not in detail, but the industry panel visits, and note that the number of organizations that we had provide comment to us. I think that's important to share.
Yeah.
That those folks came and talked with you.
Maybe, just mention that we got an update from the different program directors, and got to meet a couple of the new people, new managers.
Yes. Just reading from his name here, right? Yeah.
Lauren Henderson, Acting Director. If I could ask the board, and I don't mean this, but I'm assuming it's valuable for the board to meet, particularly our new managers, sooner than later. Is that helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Very helpful. Yes. That's
All right, because
interesting.
I know for me, it's a little embarrassing for any of our staff when they say, Lauren, I say, oh, I've never met you. And they say, oh, I've been here for 5 years. It's like, oh, no, really? So I try not to do that, but we expect a lot out of our managers. And so I think it's good that they interact with the board sooner than later. So we'll continue to bring them here and do that, and at least do some introductions.
Okay.
I'm not the only one, but if any of them ever want to come see us at our work,
okay,
I'd be more than happy to meet with them for a minute or two or whatever. They're all over the place, most of them. So,
one of the big, Lauren Henderson, Acting Director, one of the biggest asks that I get from particularly our new managers is mentoring. And I've told them, mentoring comes in all kinds of places and people. And it's not just me or anybody else. And so we may take you up on that, just to have a conversation or a cup of coffee. I think that's a valuable experience to be out.
This is Elin Miller, and I would say, I certainly would be very happy to do that. And I'm sure some of our other board members, when you're in the area, anybody's in the area to have that connectivity, that would be That would be great. I did also have a question. When was the last newsletter then that we had? So we have a lot of subject matter then, right? Carla, I didn't want to heap more on you if you've got plenty.
We do. I have plenty to add and fill in a good kind of year-end report, and we'll include this meeting in it, and we'll get caught up with that, and as well as completing the annual report.
Okay, so that could maybe be a longer report than normal just because we're kind of catching up then.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right. Luisa Santa Maria here for the record. We don't have any other thing. I think we are going to close our meeting for today. The meeting is adjourned today. Thank you very much to the members that join us remotely. And yeah, we would like to see you next time. Next time. When is the next time meeting?
Oh, the next meeting will be June 13.
June 13.
Through 15 in Roseburg. That's where we're planning to.
So hope to see you there. And for today, we are done. Meeting is adjourned. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Aloha.